Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let's do the Dhyana Shloka. And also to inform you that we have the text of the Dhyana Shloka in the prayer section of the chapter 8. So you can go to the website and click on the Gita chapter 8 class, and there you will see the text for both the beginning prayer, the ending prayer, and also the Dhyana Shloka. And I believe with meanings also. Parthaya pratibodhitam bhagavata narayanena swayam vyasena grathitam purana munina madhye mahabharatam advaitamritavarshinim bhagavatim ashtadashadhyayinim ambattvananusandadhami Bhagavad-Gita bhavatveshinim yam brahma varunendra rutra marutaha stunvanti divyaistavaihi vedaishang pasokramopanishadaihi gayanti yam samagaha dhyanavastita tatkatena manasa pashyanti yam yoginaha yasyantam na vidussura suragana devaya tasmai namaha. Okay, so what we had done in the last class was to revise the general structure of the Bhagavad-Gita. Talked about the first 6 chapters, the second, 7th through the 12th, 6 chapters. And then we had gone into the more detail about the last chapter that we did, so that we can see a continuity with our current chapter that we are going to do, number 8. And so we spent some time looking at the 7th chapter, and at that moment we were looking at the I believe verses 12 to 19 of the 7th chapter. We're still talking about the 7th chapter. So we had looked into the verses number 12 to 19. So the beginning of the second section of the 6 chapters, number 7 to 12, was more about Ishvara than about the Jiva. So this is how the Vedanta proceeds, is that it talks about the 2 aspects of our lives. One is the microcosmic aspect of our life, which is my own status as a human being, my life, my aspirations, my problems. And the other one is the macrocosmic aspect of life, which is the totality of it. And this is what Ishvara. So both have to be sketched out and then connected in manner. So they have to be individually sketched out and then connected, so that we have an overall idea of what we are talking about. In some ways, it's interesting that when you draw a circle, and you draw a perfect circle, you do not know where the circle began. It doesn't really matter. It could have been drawn counterclockwise, or it could be drawn clockwise. Doesn't matter, but it's done now. And when you're finished doing it, there is no disconnection. It's all one. And it's very interesting that the circle is the symbol of infinity. In a way, I mean, it's not normally shown to be, infinity has its own sign and so on. But the circle represents infinity in the sense there is no beginning, no end. It's a complete aspect of everything. So now what happens is that in Vedanta, the microcosm and macrocosm can both be started in explaining. So generally speaking, what we find in our Vedantic books, in our spiritual books, is that the human being is first talked about. And that sketch is now made. Then Ishvara is made, the sketch of the Ishvara is made. Very rarely you will have a sketch of the Ishvara made first. Because we can relate to things that are closer to me much better. Ishvara, we don't know where Ishvara is and so on. And so therefore, most of the Vedantic texts start with the Tvam-pada Vachya, you as a person. Same thing is true in Drigdrishya Viveka, which we started Rupam Drishyam Lochanam Drik, the eye, the seen things and so on. Most of the Vedantic texts start with Tvam-pada Vachya, even in Bhagavad-Gita. So it was really Arjuna's problem, a very personal, specific issue that was addressed. And there Sri Krishna said in the second chapter that you are making a mistake. You think you are a mortal person. You are not an immortal person. You are an immortal person. And you are just worrying about immortality for nothing. Please understand that. And so there also the sketching was done for the human being. Ishvara was kept on the side for the time being. There are some books in Vedanta that do start with Ishvara. Ishavasya Upanishad is one of those. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. But generally speaking, most of the Vedantic books first sketch the jiva, then go to Ishvara later on. Then finally the identity is pointed out. So now, in the second section of the 6 chapters, Ishvara is being talked about. So there, what was pointed out was that this is the nature of Ishvara. So this is the nirupanam of the nature of Ishvara. And then the gunas of Ishvara. All of that was talked about. So in doing the nature of Ishvara, if you recall, there were 2 Prakritis, what is called Aparaksha and Prakriti, the inferior and the superior. The inferior means what is incidental, changing, and what could be called a personality. A personality. And the superior, which is Nirguna Prakriti, Paraprakriti, is the very Swarupa, the person behind the personality, and one which is non-changing. So this can be true for really anything. So if you look at, let's say, an example of it's interesting, this is normally not talked about, but I was thinking about this. Take, for example, space, Akasha. So what is the nature of Akasha. What is the Paraprakriti? What is the Nirguna Prakriti? The Nirguna Paraprakriti of Akasha, of space, is that it does not have any guna of its own, does not have a quality of its own. And it is formless. So formfulness is also a quality. It doesn't even have that. It is purely formless, and it gives space for other things. That's what the nature of space is. But the saguna quality of Akasha, what is called the Aparaprakriti of Akasha, is what? Let's think about it. The Aparaprakriti of Akasha is that it can appear to be colorful. You can have blueness in the sky, or you can have darkness in the sky, or you can have lightness in the sky. You can have pollution in the sky. You can have windiness in the sky. Well, the windiness is actually in Vayu, so let's leave that aside. But anyway, so the personality of the Akasha is that it has all these qualities, but all those are incidental. The intrinsic quality of Akasha is that this is the Paraprakriti. So similarly here also, Ishvara's Prakriti is Paraprakriti and Aparaprakriti. Paraprakriti is Satyam Jnanam Anantam, one which is never given up. And that means it always is. This is the nature of consciousness. And so the consciousness always is. And it is always conscious, Satyam Jnanam, and Anantam. There's no boundary to it. You cannot say consciousness is the very bedrock of the whole life. This is the Paraprakriti. Aparaprakriti means now all kinds of gunas, good and bad gunas, can come in. You can say, I am conscious now. I can be unconscious sometime. This is not true, but we can think about that. Or we can say, I am limited, I'm unhappy, I'm happy. All those are Aparaprakriti. So one interesting thing to think about, this is an important thing. You know, we always talked about the Saguna Brahma and Nirguna Brahma. Saguna Brahma is called Ishvara, and Nirguna Brahma is called, that's the Paraprakriti, which is called Brahman. So we always talk about the Paraprakriti and Aparaprakriti of Ishvara. But what I think we should do is to understand that the Para and Apara Prakriti pertains to us also. And the word also is important because also doesn't mean separate from Ishvara. It is actually Ishvara's Parakriti, which is my Paraprakriti. And Ishvara's Aparaprakriti is also my Aparaprakriti. Slight differences because Ishvara's Prakriti is infinite. Saguna Prakriti is infinite. You have many worlds and stars and all kinds of stuff going on. Whereas my Prakriti, Apara Prakriti, is limited to what I see, what I experience. So there are some differences. But what I'm saying is this. When we talk about Nirguna Brahma and Saguna Brahma, we kind of look upon as something else to understand. But really the Nirgunatvam and the Sagunatvam Ishvara is really my Nirgunatvam and my Sagunatvam. So we should always look upon it from our own perspective. So there we saw that I also have Nirgunatvam, which I have to discover. Because normally I am only dealing with Sagunatvam. Sagunatvam means with all the gunas. So I'm always thinking of myself as here and now, having issues, disappointments, or to be happy or be unhappy, be disappointed or be relieved or to be, all those kinds of things is really how I think about. I do not yet think about, this is what the whole study is all about, I cannot think of myself as being nirguna. But that is the truth. My essential nature is nirguna, not saguna. And it is not until I am able to distinguish between them and translate that into some kind of my own personal experience will I be able to ascertain the differences between them. So this is what was begun on verse number 12 through 19. Then the second part of the chapter, so the first part of the chapter 7, I'm still talking about chapter 7, in a way, in kind of like a revision, but more in terms of the introduction to chapter number 8. So the first part of the chapter was to talk about the Ishvara Swarupa. The second one was the grace of Ishvara in the form of the fact that if I begin to appreciate Ishvara's Swarupa, the best way to do that is to transform myself into a bhakta, into an upasaka. So it is not until I become a bhakta can I really understand Ishvara. So this bhakti that was talked about was in the form of an upasana. This is how we ended the last class, and I thought that I had a few more words to talk about, so I will now. So this word upasana is a very interesting one. And there is a difference between, actually there is no real difference between upasana and bhakti. But the way to look at that perhaps could be to make a differentiation. And that is, bhakti normally represents blind faith. It doesn't have to be, but usually bhakti refers to the fact it's a non-verifiable belief that I just believe in you and I don't care to check to see whether this is true or not, but please preserve my belief in you. This is called one kind of bhakti. Upasana, on the other hand, is what is called a jnana-purvakam bhakti. Jnana-purvakam bhakti means prior to verification, bhakti prior to verification. Is called jnana-purvakam. It means a bhakti which is inching towards verifiability. Because really speaking, the bhakti should morph into jnana. So that's exactly what upasana is. The upasana is a process where your bhakti slowly morphs into jnana. They also saw in last class, one way of looking at the structure of the Bhagavad-Gita is that the first 6 chapters primarily talk about karma. The second 6 chapters primarily talk about upasana, and the third 6 chapters primarily talk about jnanam, knowledge. So the upasana is a special form of bhakti which helps you to morph into jnana. Jnana purvakam bhakti. And so what that means is that slowly you have to develop an appreciation and see the truth behind it. So the bhakti is provisional. That's the word I was looking for. It is provisional. And I think the example from our life also is a very good one, which is that if you were to understand the Einstein's equation of E is equal to mc squared, well, not only Einstein but all the other scientists also, who say that energy and mass are interchangeable. If you were to understand this is not an ordinary thing to understand by any physics student. And so what you have to do is you have to equip yourself to be able to understand it. So this is what is called bhakti. And the bhakti which is Shraddha Purvakam bhakti. You cannot say, it doesn't make any sense. How can energy be equal to mass? I don't know. This is all just poppycock. No. If you're a sincere student of physics, then you will say, I don't understand it today, but let me do study so I can slowly morph into an understanding, called Jnana Purvakam Bhakti. So in that sense, the upasana, which is the study of raising your own understanding to a point where at one time you will be able to say, yes, I see it. So that's kind of the sense of the 6th chapter of 7th through the 12th, all of that. So there, this was hinted at on the 16th verse of the 7th chapter, this whole idea. So if you look at this is what is said. I think I have it here. Yeah. He says, no, I'm sorry, I have it the wrong one. Chaturvidha bhajante mam janaha sukritorjuna arto jigyasu artharthi jnani cha bharatarshava tesham jnani nitya yuktaha eka bhaktir vishishyate priyo hi jnaninorthyam aham asasma priyaha jnanino tirtham aham cha sacha mama priyaha. So he says, so this is an example of the morphing of upasana towards jnana, slowly transforming itself. So there the upasana is seen to be a process. It's not a singular thing that you just, this is something very much like developing the love for someone. And that is the very principle behind the arranged marriage system in India. I mean, that's the usual example given on this, and I don't mind repeating it. And so really the loving of a person is initially mandated. by the very act of marriage. So you don't start loving your spouse from day one. But you are given an opportunity to get very close to a person, to appreciate the gunas of the person, and hopefully develop a love for it, usually develop a certain love for the other person, which takes a little process to do. So similarly here also, by enunciating the very Swarupa of Ishvara, it's very possible that it's like mandating a marriage. You don't really have an understanding of the gunas of Ishvara. But through morphing of the Upasana, you now have an understanding about the knowledge of Ishvara. So there he says, Chaturvidha bhajante mam. He says, 4 kinds of people are devoted to me, have a devotion to me. Really speaking, what he's saying, there are 4 stages of development. You can either look upon as 4 stages of development in a single person, or you can say there are 4 examples of people who are closer to me. Either way, it doesn't matter. And it's better to look upon the 4 stages in a single personality of ourselves. First one is called Artaha. Artaha means it's a so at least you have now begun the process of recognizing Ishvara. Because it's very possible that you may have an idea that forget about God, there is no God, everybody is on to themselves. This is the mindset of a criminal, isn't it? So a person who has no regard for any laws of any order, leave aside the very presence of God in our life, you can just say, I don't care, I have to do what I need to do. This is one kind of a person. But then the very entry of the possibility of Ishvara comes in from the first stage, which is Artha. Artha means one who has a problem. And so really this is very common that you find people who are severely injured or they have some kind of a problem and they can appeal to the people around them. But you also first time recognize that maybe I should recognize there is higher power. If you are there, please help me. So this is what our acharyas say, that you say, it is always good to give the benefit of the doubt to God, because you assume that He is there, and if He doesn't appear to be there, then nothing is lost. But at least you should give the benefit of doubt. And so the Artha is the one that only thinks about God when there is a problem. There is no problem, then you forget about God. This is the first stage. Then the next stage is Artharthi. Artharthi means one who has a commercial relationship with God. And it says, okay, if you do this for me, I will do this, I will pray, I will give $500 to this temple if I hope you give me the following results. So this is to do a bhakti. This is what is called Sakama Bhakti. This will come a little bit later on, but so this is called Sakama Bhakti. Samakama Bhakti means Kama Sahavartate, one which is accompanied by a desire to accomplish something. There is a bhakti. That bhakti is called Artharthi Bhakti. So the Artharthi is a person who has a specific, which is good, because if you go to a temple, somebody can say, hey, what are you doing here? Oh, I am going to this temple. Why? Oh, I want to get this puja done. Why? Oh, because there's been some problems of health in our family and something is going on. I don't understand what it is. So I'm hoping that by doing these pujas, then some blessing will come to us and then we'll be okay. So if you have a person who's purely agnostic, they'll think, I don't understand. Why would people do things like that? There is no God or anything. You just take care of yourself. That's all that you need to do. Compared to that, a person that has some shraddha towards the possibility of God giving some blessing is called Artharthi. Then the third type, which is the morphing, is called Jigyasuhu. Jigyasuhu is a more evolved form of Artharthi, which means, and this is exactly what we were talking about in the Brahma Sutra class, Jigyasa means to learn about God. And I was giving the example that really my transformation came when I could be convinced by my time spent with Swami Dayanandji and Swami Chinmayanandji that the introduction to Ishvara, introduction to this whole world can be learnt systematically. And it was good that I was able to break down because the skepticism. See, because I was obviously an engineer and a scientist and so on, and all this sounded like mumbo jumbo to me. But once I started listening to our acharyas, I became convinced that there is the authenticity in this is something that really needs to be learned. I don't get it yet, but I think if I persist in it, I will get it. This is what is called Jigyasuhu. That's the third type of the upasaka. This is all upasana. They're all stages of upasana, stages of bhakti, if you may. The fourth one is a jnani. Jnani is the one, and here in this last stage, the upasana has turned into knowledge. So this is what is called Aparaksha Anubhuti, as we talked about in the previous class, and it means that it is no longer something to be established. It is not a sadhya anymore. You become a siddha purusha. You have a direct knowledge of your sense of independence. So, Swami Maheshananji also has pointed out, this is the same process that we were talking about earlier in the previous class also, but in a different words. So he says, really, if you look at what happens in the journey of a jnani, if you break down the segments of what happens to a person who is a knowledgeable person. Jnani means Atma Jnani, Brahma Jnani. If you break down the journey, here's what happens. You first develop certain sense of reverence to other things in life except for yourself. It is not just everything to yourself. There are other people involved and you have a reverence for it that develops. This is number one. Then this is backed by the admittance of the possibility of God. So you develop now a reverence not just for people, any other person, but for this unknowing force which is behind all other people, so-called Ishvara or God. And so you develop a reverence for that. And from there, through the reverence, you find out that there is in fact an order of things to be done. What is to be done, what is not to be done, what is to be followed, what is not to be followed. So this is the knowledge of the laws of Shastra, laws of Ishvara in the form of Shastric vidhis and nishedha, what is to be done, what is not to be done. This, when it happens, then the right person to teach Vedanta is made available to you. It doesn't have to follow exactly the same, but the general sequence is that finally you meet someone who puts the structure behind the whole thing. And one who has already gone through the study and has benefited from it. Only that person can really teach you. If a person has gone through this academically and has not yet imbibed the lessons of Vedanta, then he's not the right person to talk to you. But if you find someone whose life also exemplifies this trial of understanding, then he's the right person, he or she is the right person for you to talk to. Once that happens, then you now go through the Shravana Mana Nididhyasana. What is the language of Vedanta? How do you apply for it? Apply it. All of that has to be done next. This is the jigyasu. So at first you were artha, then you become artharthi, then you become jigyasu. You keep doing it. Then what happens is that the lesson transforms into your own independence. And at that moment, there is no guru, there is no Ishvara, there is no world, there is only one thing, which is Brahman, which is you. So this is the process of freedom that we have to really discover and go through. So here now, in this 7th chapter, this was all talked about in the one section of the 7th chapter. Then in the verses number 20 to 26 of the 7th chapter, this was sharpened to say that there are two kinds of bhaktis, as I mentioned before. One is called Sakama Bhakti and the other one is called Nishkama Bhakti. So Sakama Bhakti means very, very similar to the segmentation of artharthi person, is where you look for specific results. There also a faith in God is important, but with that faith you say, may I, if you are not healthy, may I regain my health. I don't have any children, may I be given some children. I don't have enough wealth, can I be given? Like that you can have specific aim. This is called Sakama Bhakti. Sakama Bhakti, of course, is possible, but the limitation of Sakama Bhakti should be seen. that it is very limited. No one promises you, and you cannot assume that this will give you any permanence. This is temporary only, just to get by life. And even as it is given to you, it is also slowly taken away. You can see it slip. And these are the factors of Sakama Bhakti. In some ways, I think the example of Swami Dhananji had given that example, very beautiful example, that of having a fall and injuring your, let's say, a knee. You have a knee problem, or an ankle, doesn't matter, somewhere in the legs. So now a doctor gives you, so you approach a doctor and say, so either some surgery is done, some physical therapy, whatever, and then you are said, the doctor tells you, for the next few months, you have to use some crutches. And you just get some crutches, so use some crutches. Then as you start to use the crutches, you discover that there are better kind of crutches, that they are with more cushions and something that gives a little bit. They are not as rigid. I don't know, I'm just making up. So there are better crutches, lighter crutches. So you look for better crutches. Can I please have better crutches? Can I have some medical prescription for better crutches, so that I am able to negotiate? Can I have a chair to sit on, some kind of an automated chair that I can move around? Like that, improved structure, infrastructure. This is all part of Sakama Bhakti. Okay? Then comes Nishkama Bhakti. Nishkama Bhakti, which is, verses 20 to 26 of the 7th chapter talks about Sakama Bhakti. Then verses number 27 to 30 goes into Nishkama Bhakti. And then Nishkama Bhakti means not looking for better crutches, but for looking for no need for crutches. That's what it is. I'm tired of getting better and better crutches. I want the whole problem to go away to begin with. So Nishkama Bhakti here is also a bhakti towards Ishvara alone, but it's in the form, may you make me independent so that I don't keep on seeking you all the time. As long as I am seeking you, I am not free. Is it possible that you can give me total freedom? That is what I seek from you. Nothing specific. So this is how the Nishkama Bhakti is talked about in the 7th chapter. Okay. Now we transition from the 7th chapter to the 8th chapter. So here the author of Bhagavad-Gita does something very interesting. He slowly puts the seed of the next chapter towards the end of the previous chapter. So he makes it into a transition. And so towards the very end of the 7th chapter, instead of just the normal Ishvara Swarupa that we talked about earlier, a more detailed form of the Ishvara Swarupa, the seeds of that are already planted towards the end of the 7th chapter. And so, there Krishna already hints at some new definitions of Ishvara Swarupa. And he gives 7 different aspects of this new definition of Ishvara Swarupa. They are as follows. Brahma, Karma, Adhyatmam, Adibhutam, Adidaivatam, Adijnanam, Adiyajna. This is number 6. And the 7th one is how you should spend the last aspect of your life. Unless you have already become a jnani, in which case you won't need me because you've become completely independent and you won't need to have the next life. But until then, if you have not reached jnanam, self-jnanam, atma-jnanam, you're going to be continuing on with your being a jiva. The question is, how do you transition from this life to the next life? What do you do towards the end of your life? These are the 7th one. He already hints that in the end of the 7th chapter. So this is given in verse number 29 and 30, the last 2 verses of 7th chapter. And we have not started to chant the Gita verses. We will do so from next class on, or perhaps even we can do that today itself. So if we were to simply chant, and this is the normal way of chanting that we have all learned from Swami Dayanandji, who himself has learnt it from some Panditaha in Tamil Nadu, as is a very good way to chant like this. So you essentially chant in 4 sections. So each line has 2 sections, and 2 lines have 2 sections each, so a total of 4 sections. In terms of a pause, a slight pause between them, it goes something like this. So this is verse number 29 of the 7th chapter. Jara marana mokshaya, pause. Mama shritya jatanti ye, pause. Te brahma tat vidu kritsnam, pause. Adhyatmam karma chakhilam. So these are 4 sections. 4 padas, as it is called. Once again. Jara marana mokshaya mama shritya vayatanti te brahma tat vidukritsnam adhyatmam karma chakhilam. Then the next one. Sadhi bhutadi daivam mam sadhi yagyam cha ye viduhu prayana kale pichamam te viduryukta chetasaha. One more time. Sadhi bhutari daivam mam sadhi yagyam cha ye viduhu prayana kale pichamam te viduryukta chetasaha. That's how it's pronounced, as we have learned, and I suggest that we kind of follow the same tone of doing it. So, number 29 was Jara marana mokshaya mam ashritya yatanti ye te brahma tad viduhu kritsnam adhyatmam karma chakhilam. So he says, those people who want to be independent of jara. So jara means growing very old. The problems of extremely old people, which we all know about, when things start to break down, is called jara. Finally, marana. Marana means that you cannot sustain the body anymore and you have to give it up. So he says, those people who want to be free of jara and marana, those who resort to they come to me, they resort to my presence, or they come to me in order to get rid of jara and marana, then they resort to the following. They understand what the following things are. One is Brahma, we already talked about Brahma. Then it's in different sequence here. Adhyatmam, and we'll explain what Adhyatmam is. In fact, these will be answered in the 8th chapter. That's what I'm talking about. That these 7 points that are hinted at the end of the 7th chapter will be answered in the beginning of the 8th chapter. So, te brahma tad viduhu kritsnam adhyatmam karma cha akhilam. So then you have Brahma, Adhyatman and Karma. Then the next verse, Sadibhuta. Sadibhuta here means, so this is Adibhut, Sa Adibhutam. That's number 4. Adidaivam. Number 5. Sadhiyagyam. Number 6. So 6 gone. Karma, Brahma, Adhyatmam, Adibhutam, Sadhidaivam. These are all the Swarupas in detail of Ishvara. That's what he's talking about. Then the 7th one is Prayana Kale Apicha Mam Te Viduhu Yukta Chetasaha. And he says, those people who towards the end of their life, Prayana Kale means when it is, your life is ebbing away, visibly ebbing away. The doctor has also said, there's nothing much we can do, and so on. So Prayan, this is what is called Prayana Kale. So when you are at the end of your life, then Yukta Chetasaha who Mam Ashritya Yatantite, who are steadfast in their mind in being devoted to me. So this section of the 7th one will be detailed in great detail on the 8th chapter. But before we come to that, there is a lot to be said about this last one, Prayana Kale. Then and how are you being devoted yukta chetasaha, how you are going to be devoted to God. You and I, even when we are not under some dire problem, have a hard time being devoted to God. Leave aside that time when our limbs are giving us problems, when our prana is about to go, all the bandhugana, all my relatives and kids and so on and so forth, they're all crying and they want the attention that I love them and they love me. In the midst of all this, how am I going to have God? So this is the whole examination on the 8th chapter that we are going to see. Anyway, so now to summarize, very cleverly, the author of Bhagavad-Gita has planted the seeds of these 6 main topics of the Swarupa of Ishvara towards the end of the 7th chapter. And with that, we enter into the 8th chapter, which is the main topic of this course. So now, let us now chant the first 2 verses of the 8th chapter. Okay? So what I will do is, I will, from now on, this is how I will do it. I will first enunciate the 4 padas and have a pause so that you can also do this with me. So we'll repeat everything twice when you're doing it new verses. Obviously this is, I cannot see you. Otherwise in the class we will do this together. But you kindly follow me and you can do it both times, or the first time you just listen to me and the second time you can just repeat after me. Arjuna Uvacha. So you can say Arjuna Uvacha. Kim tat brahma kim adhyatmam. Kim tat brahma kim adhyatmam. Kim karma purushottamam. Kim karma purushottamam. Adibhutam cha kim proktam. Adibhutam cha kim proktam. Adhidaivam kimuchyate. Adhidaivam kimuchyate. So before going to the second verse, let me say this. So there is a break has to be done at the right pada. So like for example in the second line of the verse number 1, Adibhutam cha kim proktam. So the makara, the ma, prokta madhidaivam, is broken into the consonant and the vowel. So that sandhi has to be broken and you need to know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, then your pronunciation will not be accurate. Now, one very good book that has been published by Chinmaya Mission, I don't have a copy here in front of me, otherwise I could show it to you. There is a book by Chinmaya Mission where they have redone these verses with sandhi broken. So it's easier to pronounce, and if you really want to do that, please try to get a book from the Chinmaya Mission on the Bhagavad-Gita. They've done a very good job of doing that. Anyway, so let me repeat first verse and then we'll go to the second verse. Kim tad brahm Arjuna uvacha. Kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam. Kim karma purushottamam. Kim karma purushottama. Adibhutam cha kim proktam. Adhidaivam kim uchyate. Then now the second verse. Adhiyagya katham kotra. Adhiyagya katham kotra. Dehesmin madhusudana. Dehesmin madhusudana. Prayana kale chakatham, Prayana kale chakatham, Gyeyosi niyatatmabhihi, Gyeyosi niyamatmabhihi. So with these verses, the points that were hinted at, the seeds of which were planted in the 7th chapter, now fructify in the form of questions by Arjuna. Arjuna Uvacha means, Arjuna now says, Kim tad Brahma? Can you tell me, you use the word Brahma. What is that Brahma? Kim Adhyatmam? What is the Adhyatmam that you spoke of? Kim Karma? What is Karma? You use the word Karma, but I don't understand how I should view the Karma. Hey Purushottama. Who Purushottama means that one who is the most superior Purusha. Avatara of Ishvara is the most superior Purusha. He's also a Purusha like you and I, but is a amazing Purusha who has an understanding of the whole thing because he's the Avatara of Ishvara. So, hey Purushottama, for Krishna, can you please tell me what is Brahma, which is Adhyatmam, and what is Karma? Okay. Then the second line. Adibhutam chakim. You talked about Adibhutam. What is that? Kim proktam, the one you said. Adidaivam kim uchyate. Then Adidaivam, what? The one that you speak of. Then the next verse, Adiyagyam katham. What is this Adiyagya you talk about? Kaha atra dehe asmin madhusudana. That how is that Adiyagya in this body that I possessed? Atra dehe asmin madhusudana kaha. What is this Adiyagya you talk about? Finally, in the second line of the second verse, Prayana kalecha katham jnyosi niyata atmabhihi. That the people who have yukta cheta means who are fully absorbed in thinking of you at the time of death. How do they do it? And what do they see? How can I be one of those? You say that is a very important thing for me to do if I am not already a jnani and therefore I can expect another birth. How do I ensure that I do the best job of remembering you at that time? Because you seem to think it is a very important thing. Why? Is the question of Arjuna. So there, let us chant the next 3 verses and then see how much time we have to go into that. So if you can follow me, again we will follow the same method of saying every pada twice. Shri Bhagavan-uvacha, Shri Bhagavan-uvacha, Aksharam Brahma Paramam, Aksharam Brahma Paramam, Svabhavodhyatmam uchyate, Svabhavodhyatmam uchyate, Bhutabhavodbhavataro. Okay, now here, because we are breaking the sandhi, the karo will become karaha. So the visarga will become distant. If you're doing the sandhi, then the visarga takes the kam u, becomes karo. So this is what I was talking about, that if you go to the Chinmaya Mission book, there you will say Bhuta Bhavodbhavat Karaha. So here you have to do it mentally because you are breaking sandhi. If you're not making sandhi, if you're not breaking sandhi and you're doing in the first line, then it is okay. It will be something like this. Bhuta bhavo karo visarga karma sangitaha. But if you're breaking sandhi into 4 segments, which is what we are doing now, then the sandhi rules apply and it should be karaha. So let's just do that. Bhuta bhavo karaha. Bhuta bhavo karaha. Visarga karma samgitaha. Visarga karma samgitaha. Adibhutam ksharo bhavaha. This is number 4. Adibhutam ksharo bhavaha. Purushashchadi daivatam. Purushashchadi daivatam. Adiyagyoham. Adiyagyohame vatra. Adiyagyohame vatra. Dehe deha bhritam vara. Dehe deha bhritam vara. Then the number 5, last one. Antakale cha mameva. Antakale cha mameva. Smaran muktva kalevaram. Smaran muktva kalevaram. Yaf prayati samadbhavam. Yaf prayati samadbhavam. Yati nastyat samshayaha. Yati nastyatra samshayaha. Yati nastyatra samshayaha. So here Sri Krishna begins to answer these, and so I think we will probably do this in full in the next class. But the only thing I would say is a couple of things before we get to that. One is that the name of this chapter is the first word of the 3rd verse. Aksharam Brahma. Aksharam Brahma. So if you look at number 28. Om Tat Satiti Srimad Bhagavad-Gita Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Akshara Brahma Yogo Nama Ashtamo Dhyaya. So the name of this chapter is Akshara Brahma. So that Akshara Brahma is the first explanation of the answer of Krishna in this chapter, and that becomes the name of the whole chapter. What was the name of the 7th chapter? Jnana Vijnana Yogo Nama Saptamo Adhyaya. So the 7th chapter was called Jnana Vijnana. So we have done that already. But what that means is, not only as a Paroksha Jnanam of Ishvara, but as the Aparaksha Jnanam of Ishvara. Not only the Ishvara as separate from me, but a very integral part of me is called Vijnanam. So this is what is called Paroksha Bhuti and Aparaksha Anubhuti. So when your Upasana morphs into Jnanam, then the Atmatvam becomes Brahmatvam. It all becomes one. And that is called Vijnanam. So Jnanam is general knowledge and Vijnanam is Vishesha Jnanam, which is me. You're not blocking Ishvara from being you. Right now we are blocking Ishvara from being you. No, you don't want to be me. But Vijnanam is where it becomes my own personal understanding, not just an academic understanding. So that was the Jnana Vijnana. Here, the definition of the chapter is Akshara Brahma, and we will look into that, what Akshara Brahma means in